We're starting off strong with the Kentler Experiment. This was a really fucked up social experiment conducted in West Berlin from the 1970s to early 2000s by a German psychologist called Helmut Kentler. The experiment revolved around placing homeless children, primarily orphans, into the care of paedophiles, which is wild for me to even think about. And the most corrupt aspect of this was that this experiment was carried out with the knowledge and support of West Berlin's youth welfare officers. So now let's take a little trip into the mind of Mr. Kentler, because it is a very interesting place. He believed that paedophiles would make loving parents and that a sexual relationship between the kids and paedophiles would be healthy. He suggested that paedophiles could provide a loving and supportive environment for the children. I mean, I agree paedophiles love kids, but not in that way. Kentler also believed parents should introduce their kids to sexuality rather than hide it from them, because if they hid it from them, he believed the kids were at risk of being sexually crippled and underdeveloped. It gets worse from here. Kentler also warned parents to not be concerned about a child getting raped or molested. He stated the worst thing a parent can do is lose their nerve, panic, and run to the police. He said if the adult was considerate and tender, the child could have enjoyed it.
Right on. Guilty! That nigga is guilty!
This dude also was hired as a forensic expert in abuse cases. He wrote a book called Levator in which he addresses placing kids with paedophiles. Jan Feddersen praises Kentler as a meritorious fighter for permissive sexual morality. Some Protestant churches also agreed with him. The Humanist Union also had good stuff to say about Kentler. I mean, you can read what they said, but I'm not going to go into it because it's actually really disgusting. To me, it just looks like pedos defending other pedos. Kentler had 3 adoptive sons and 1 foster son. Whether he himself sexually assaulted any of them is unknown. However, one of his colleagues claimed Kentler disclosed that he sexually abused one of his sons from age 13 throughout adulthood until his son committed suicide in 1991. Now let's take a break from humans destroying other humans and look at humans destroying chimpanzees. Heinrich Kluver was a neuropsychologist and Paul Bucy was a neurosurgeon. Kluver studied a chemical called mescaline which came from cactus. This chemical caused hallucinations. He noticed that when monkeys were given this chemical they'd smack their lips, so he wanted to try and find the part of the brain that was affected by this chemical. They worked with an aggressive monkey called Aurora and took out her left temporal lobe. When Aurora woke up, she had lost her aggressive behaviour and was much more calm and peaceful. After this, Kluver lost interest in mescaline and started focusing on the brain a lot more. The pair conducted more experiments on rhesus monkeys. They began removing parts of the temporal lobe, specifically the amygdala. I think this is the similar experiment that happens in Get Out, the movie, where they remove the amygdala and the black people lose control of their minds or something like that. Anyways, the amygdala is responsible for your flight or fight response along with your emotions. The effect this had on the monkeys was crazy. They became numb to anything that threatened them. They looked at a bear the same way they looked at an almond nut. They began ucking everything, sticking whatever they could find in their mouths. They struggled recognizing well-known objects, and they became extremely sexual. They started doing all sorts of inappropriate sexual acts like humping anything they could find, including objects like trees or sticks. And then they started killing each other and became very violent. Anyways, after the results of this experiment, this became known as the Kluver and Bucy syndrome, and was observed in humans with brain damage in similar areas. So yeah. For this next experiment, we travel all the way back to the 13th century and go to the Roman Empire. The emperor at this time was Frederick II. Now Frederick was a very curious individual and he wanted to discover the natural language of human beings. He figured the best way to do this was by raising infants in isolation. He wanted to know what would happen if a newborn baby never speaks to a human being. He thought that this could reveal the original language of humanity, which he thought to be Hebrew, Latin or Greek. The babies were taken from their mothers at birth, given to nurses who were instructed to feed and care for the baby, but without speaking or interacting with them, or showing them any sort of affection. The outcome of this experiment was much worse than expected. The babies didn't develop any language because they lacked any social development, and due to the absence of human contact and affection, unfortunately all the babies died. Now, by no means am I defending this experiment, but I think a better way to do this experiment would have been to allow the babies to talk to only each other and see what they'd come up with. Because realistically, if babies have zero social interaction, then there's no need for them to develop speech since they would never have to use it. I don't know why I gave my opinion on this experiment. It is an absolutely horrendous experiment, but yeah. Now, this is by far one of the worst experiments conducted since the inception of humanity. So if you guys don't want to see this, I'd suggest just skipping this section. But before we look at Unit 731 specifically, let's quickly touch on Nanking. So Nanking was the Chinese capital city and was captured by the Japanese in 1937. Over the course of the next 6 weeks, the Japanese carried out brutal and inhumane massacres and rape. Between 100,000 and 300,000 civilians and disarmed combatants were brutally killed via decapitation, bayonets, stabbings, and live burials. Young girls to elderly women were raped and killed. I actually watched this movie a while ago. It was a very good movie, obviously not for the faint-hearted, but if you can stomach these sort of things, then this movie was a very good watch, so definitely check it out. It really captures the whole massacre in all its brutality, so yeah. But anyways, this massacre was so brutal that even a Nazi by the name of John Rabe was so appalled at the massacre, even he felt bad and tried to help the victims achieve safety. They've actually even got a statue of him in Nanking today. During this massacre there was of course lots of experimentation, specifically pushing the limits of human pain. Whilst Nanking and Unit 731 aren't directly linked as far as I know, after the Nanking massacre a branch of Unit 731 was opened called Unit EI 1644, where the Japanese carried out more biological weapons testing. Now, not too much is known of this unit as information was suppressed or destroyed, but it's fair to say that once we've looked at Unit 731, it's not hard to guess what also happened in Unit EI 1644. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research center of the Imperial Japanese Army. It operated from 1937 to 1945. This unit was commanded by General Shiro Ishii. The aim of this unit was to study the effects of pathogens and chemicals on humans. However, it was basically just a playground for the Japanese to test their curiosities out on the human body. The victims included men, women, children, and even babies that were born from the systematic rape inside the unit. The victims were majority Chinese with some Russians as well. One type of experiment carried out here were vivisections. Victims were dissected alive without anesthesia to study effects of various diseases. Limbs were removed to study blood loss. They were reattached somewhere else on the body to see the effect. The victims were used to test impact of grenades at various distances along with flamethrowers. They did frostbite testing, allowing the limbs to freeze and then conducting a variety of curiosity experiments. They did forced syphilis testing, forced pregnancy, low pressure chambers, literally anything you can think of, they probably did it. I'm not going to go into too much more detail because it is really quite bad, all the things that they did, but yeah. After Japan's defeat in World War II, every single prisoner was murdered and all evidence was hidden. America got a sniff of this and knew what the Japanese had been up to. However, after looking at all the data the Japanese had collected from Unit 731, America actually found it very informative and useful, so they pardoned a lot of the war criminals and generals in charge of Unit 731, along with the people who participated. So yeah, they basically just all got let free, which is absolutely horrendous.